It's often said that women are twice as likely to become depressed as men. If this is true, is it because women are basically weak, vulnerable creatures whose only useful function is to have and bring up children? Or is this instead just a convenient label applied to women by a male-dominated society? In this program, I'm going to be taking a look at women, but not in the way that you might expect, because quite frankly it would be wrong for me as a man to talk about women's feelings and expectations, because I am a man and I can't possibly know what it's like to be a woman, and for that matter a depressed woman. So to help me, I've brought in Dr. Judy Greenwood, a community psychiatrist and former GP, who I think can come in and give us a much more accurate picture of what it's like to be a woman. Judy, I've got 5 women here on the screen. Now, I want to make what I consider to be a chauvinist statement. It seems to me that women are stereotyped according to age or sex or whatever. Now, at 18 years old, a girl's got to have a boyfriend. At 25, she's supposed to have thought about having a baby. By the time she's reached 30, if she hasn't had a child, she's a bit odd or strange. Once a woman gets into her 40s, she's supposed to have a happy family and comfortably set up for older age. 50s, we start talking about menopause and that kind of thing. Now, is that unfair to women? And is that the sort of thing that men should be criticised for thinking?
Well, it sounds all very depressing for a start. I mean, it's not really surprising that we get twice as depressed as you men when you catalogue a thing like that. I mean, it's very hard. People can only generalise about these things, but there's no doubt that girls are brought up differently to boys right from the beginning. I mean, little girls are treated differently in prams to little boys, and mums are different to daughters than they are to sons. And I think that's very important that we women have a female bringing us up, which is the same sex. And there's always that bit of rivalry, I think, goes on. And it does, I know, in my own home with my own daughter, and it's quite different. You're the blue-eyed boy. You've always got the mother perhaps vaguely favouring you. So I think girls grow up with their self-esteem a little bit questioned because of that. And then there's all the business about being passive and feminine, all the well-known sex role stereotyping, as it gets called all the time, where we're not meant to be going out climbing trees and playing football. We're meant to be sort of doing passive things and looking feminine and pretty. And if we're at school, we're somehow not expected to compete the same way that you all do. And then I think really it's probably at its most difficult when girls get to teenage, and all the work shows that that's when girls' intellectual performance tails off, because now we're suddenly faced with this ghastly choice. Are we going to be feminine and attractive and try and attract you men, or are we going to be clever and compete with you, which means that we're not going to get a man? And that's certainly something I remember very vividly when I was 18. Very real conflict.
The conflict between brains and beauty is very real and must be very depressing for women. However, this subject has been so overdone by press and media in recent years that it's almost lost its meaning.
Nice soft light, nice soft feeling there.
Take the fashion business, for example. You can pick up any of the glosses and find the same images of beautiful girls in fabulous clothes as you did 10 years ago. The clothes may have changed, but the image of perfection hasn't. In other words, we seem to pay lip service to the issues, while in practice the situation has remained unchanged.
If you've got any warm powder.
For example, it took over 2 hours to transform Vanessa into a fashionable, though carefully contrived, image for public consumption. Don't you feel sometimes that the perfect woman in the magazine is not the woman that you are?
Oh, certainly. I'm not at all like, how I'm portrayed in pictures, because, I mean, you're almost acting when you're doing pictures, really, because, I just wear jeans and T-shirts, whereas often I'm wearing really sophisticated clothes, but, you're selling a certain image, and, I mean, one day I might be working for a magazine, one day for a catalogue, and so each, day in, day out, you're a different thing, totally. But knowing what goes into the pictures, you realise that it's all just an image, it really is.
But that image was carefully contrived, both in terms of the clothes she was wearing and the time and skill that went into creating this picture of perfection, right down to the smallest detail. But how fair is this kind of image creation to women? I asked June Marsh, fashion editor of Options magazine.
Well, actually, I think that's a typical male thing to say. I mean, what I try to do for that magazine is to give the women that read the magazine ideas, information ideas, and I feel that the majority of women do want to look as nice as they possibly can, and I'm not trying to project the perfect image anyway for them. I mean, to me it's a job like any other. The fashion industry is an industry like any other industry.
But is it? The fashion industry isn't like making ball bearings. It's about selling images, which it's hoped women will aspire to. I asked a group of women's counsellors if they thought that was right.
To some extent, yes, I agree with that. But I also think that it could make women feel very inadequate.
How does it make you feel? These beautiful girls, these perfect women.
Doesn't really bother me very much. I think it may have done at one time, but it certainly doesn't bother me now.
I think it depends on how happy you are in your situation. If, as a woman, you feel fairly fulfilled doing what you're doing, or you're fairly happy with your life, then it doesn't have the same effect as it might do if you are unhappy, if you do feel yourself to be inadequate in some way. I think I agree with Fee that it can make you feel very, very depressed, that you're never going to reach that looking like that woman does in that magazine.
Just a little bit of warm face.
But why on earth should women feel that they have to look like Vanessa in the first place? Or for that matter, any other image of so-called feminine perfection?
Right, we want happy pictures here. Nice happy photographs.
Happy, really? Yeah.
Not smiling, but...
Okay, thank you.
You know what I mean.
Happy pictures? Well, I don't mind admitting that Vanessa looked pretty good to me, whether she was happy or not, because I was viewing her as a member of the opposite sex. However, if I was a woman and felt a bit overweight, would I have viewed her in the same way, or would she have depressed me?
I hope not. I mean, it's my feeling that if someone is overweight and, you know, very far from perfect, they don't actually want to open a magazine and be reminded of that. I mean, magazines shouldn't intimidate people, but then on the other hand, they don't want to pay 60p for a magazine to be depressed. You know, I mean, I think if they saw someone who looked exactly just like, you know, like them, then I think that would be more depressing for them.
But doesn't every woman have a sense of insecurity about herself because of the portrayal of women in the media?
Oh, sure. I mean, this morning I didn't have time to wash my hair last night, no. I mean, I didn't feel anywhere near perfect to sort of be shown on television.
But isn't that the lovely thing about, you know, being honest? I mean, in a sense, are we being dishonest by what we're portraying about the perfect woman?
I think you've got it all wrong. I really don't think that we're trying to portray the perfect woman.
But it does seem to me that after 2 hours of careful preparation in which attention was lavished upon Vanessa by a team of makeup experts, it's hard to imagine that anything other than perfection was intended. The point is that we all learn to identify with images and to judge ourselves against them, which is why we feel good when we're slim and can get into those nice clothes, and bad when we can't. Some women get depressed because they feel they don't match up to the images portrayed in magazines. But then it's worth remembering that if every woman had a team of experts to make her up each day, she'd look $1 million too.
Keep that, darling. That's lovely. Very good.
Well, how can you follow a thing like that? You know, she's got all the perks going for her at the moment. She's young and attractive and enjoying her body, and she's got a marvellous body to enjoy. But what's going to happen to her in a few years' time? And what happens to all of us in a few years' time?
I don't know, it must be very intimidating.
Well, this is the problem. I mean, as I say, she's fortunate because she can make full use of her body and enjoy that, so she doesn't have to really worry about the balance between her intellect and the other bit. She's chosen her body. But as we get older and have all the problem with settling down and getting married and having hooked our man, then the next bit comes along, the child rearing and the running of the home and probably not being able to work and fulfill yourself, either using your body the way she was or using your mind, then that's the time when women really do get so vulnerable to things going heavily wrong.
I would lay in bed sometimes and I'd start shaking, absolutely trembling from head to toe. I would cry. I didn't know why. I would look for a reason. I would try and think, it must have been that.
But there's very rarely a single reason for depression. In Sue Chipchase's case, it may well have been the result of a hysterectomy, on top of all the pressures of having to devote herself entirely to her children, her husband and her home.
I finally went to the doctors for something else and broke down in his surgery. And I think I was lucky. I found a very good doctor that listened.
If men had to go through the sort of experience, say I had to go through the sort of experience you'd been through, do you think I'd cope with it?
I don't know. I think perhaps you have more experience by going out to work, which perhaps might make you more able to cope. I think men are able to cope with teenage problems. They perhaps don't worry as much about the teenage children.
Tell me, I mean, that's quite interesting what you just said. I mean, how important is going out to work?
I got to the stage when, yes, I needed to go out to work. The children didn't need me, and that was quite a blow to my feminine ideas. I wasn't needed in the home as much. And I got a part-time job just during the school term. That helped a lot. Yes, I think that kept me going. I became a very good actress. I could go to work, and I think I acted fairly normally.
While at the same time?
While at the same time at home, I was another person.
What about your kids? How did they react to you?
They steered clear of me as much as they could. They went out of the house as much as possible. They went round to friends. They didn't bring friends in at that stage. They wouldn't have dared. Just kept away from me.
I imagine that probably, reinforced your own self-doubts.
Yes, I felt very inadequate, certainly. I wasn't coping anywhere.
But being a mother is itself a very tiring and stressful occupation, quite apart from having to cope with the difficulties of running a home. And on top of this, there's another major pressure. And that is to be sexually attractive and desirable. Every day, women are confronted by sexual images telling them what they have to look like to please men.
Okay.
Not a bad pair of boobs, Tessa.
I know.
Very good. Statements like that reduce women to pieces of meat. What turns men on can actually depress women because they are constantly being asked to match up to these images. But look at it another way. If the newspaper that printed these pictures was run by women, and instead they published pictures of naked men, then wouldn't we men lose confidence in ourselves and start feeling depressed? But the reality is that women are forced to live with the conflicting stereotypes of child rearer and sex object. Is this fair? Give us a really pouty, sexy shot.
No, I don't think it's fair. I think that stereotypes women into playing those roles. I think it gives a false impression of women. Women have they're people as well as being sex objects, housewives and mothers.
But who creates the stereotypes?
I think the stereotype is being created by society over the years, and women have sort of been forced into often playing those roles because that's how people see them a lot of times. I mean, particularly probably men in a male-dominated society.
And how do you feel about being labelled one of the weaker sex?
Annoyed.
Why?
Well, it depends on how it's being used. I think women have different values, different strengths. Our problems are all fudged at the edges. We're told to be one thing and expected to be another. Whereas men have very
it seems to me, have very clear-cut pressures on them. They have pressures to be good, to be successful, to be strong, masculine, whatever that means, but they have clear-cut pressures. Our pressures are all interwoven with each other. We're supposed to be beautiful and feminine, but then again, we're supposed to manage a household and have children and being a mother and being at home means 20 different jobs a day.
So the image of women as the weaker sex seems rather inappropriate when you consider how tough they have to be in fulfilling all these different roles. So why then are they still considered the weaker sex?
But you see, we are more depressed. We have more symptoms than men. So that makes us look as though we're weak because we're passive and we're not assertive and we let you get away with murder and, because we behave as though we're weaker. But my guess is that if you were all put in our position, left at home, and we were all out here doing the big things, that you'd be feeling like us. And that actually, right.
I mean, I can imagine that if a man was left at home to look after the children, he'd be terrified.
So, what's the answer? This is what women have got to ask themselves, because here we are, it looks like we are the biological caretakers and probably will have to be for some time to come. What can we do to make ourselves feel more stimulated and feel more rewarded and fulfilled in whatever lifestyle we choose to lead, but that we have to make the choice rather than it having to be chosen on our behalf by other people?
But when you have no real choice about bringing up children as V did, what does it feel like?
Very frustrating. I think frustrating is the only way that I can describe it. Especially when one is conditioned that one should have these these very strong maternal feelings. Personally speaking, I didn't have very strong maternal feelings and I felt very resentful to a certain extent. Although I dearly loved my children, but I felt that I had other things to do and was only waiting for the time when they grew older so that I could actually do what I wanted to do.
How much of a myth is this idea of having to have maternal feelings?
I'm growing more to feel that it's quite a large myth, quite a big myth, actually. But I think a lot of women are very frightened to actually admit that they aren't very maternal. And it's pure conditioning.
The one thing that clearly distinguishes women from men in relation to depression is the influence of their hormones.
Well, there's very little doubt that we are very different to men because we do have, a hormone cycle that goes on from the age of 13, 14, right the way through to 50, where every month, predictably, our body's hormones change and some rise and some fall, and this has a marked impact, particularly at times like puberty when we're first getting going, and then when we have children, when we're having babies, there's no doubt that big massive changes in hormones occur then, and that's when women are very prone to getting the puerperal or postnatal depressions. And then again at the menopause, where there seems to be more depression at that time of a woman's life again. Now, nobody's really proved whether it is the hormone changes that produce those sorts of depressions or whether in fact it's the sort of social changes that go on, because both when you've had a child and at the menopause, there's a whole pile of changes in your life, in your sort of concept of yourself and in your whole life. But at the same time, there are these very major changes happening in hormones inside your body. It's probably a combination of the two.
Did you find having a hysterectomy difficult to cope with?
Not straight away. For the first year, I felt physically much better. It was after the first year that I began to feel that I perhaps had made a mistake. Things weren't going right. I was becoming more and more depressed. I wasn't a complete person. I couldn't have any more children, although I didn't want any more. I began to wonder what I would do with my own children, if anything happened to them, if I remarried. What had I got to offer?
How did your husband react to all this?
I had been so well afterwards that he couldn't understand at that late stage what was wrong with me.
Another area where hormones are blamed for mood changes is premenstrual tension.
I don't always recognise it myself because my periods are very, very irregular. And so, but I know that I get very ratty, very uptight before my period comes. And I often react in totally different ways to how I would normally. And I don't know my period's going to come the next day or whatever, but that sort of becomes apparent just a little later on.
You see, if you take something like premenstrual tension, or PMT as it gets called, well, that's happening every month in nearly every woman's life. But there's no doubt that a good percentage of women, nearly half women, experience feelings of depression in the week before a period, or irritability or swelling, but usually with the feelings of the change in mood and low self-esteem around that time. So it's not really surprising that women are, if you take a whole group of women, some of them will be feeling a bit down in the dumps because of the hormones, if you like. But I can't believe that makes us more vulnerable in general to feeling depressed, because these other depressions that we've been talking about are much more consistent things and go on much longer. It's certainly not simply related to the hormone cycle.
So what are we saying in this program? It's easy to repeat the same old cliches about women being stereotyped and how men are responsible for maintaining the myth about women being the weaker sex. The fact is, though, that twice as many women get depressed as men. And if we want to change this situation, then attitudes will have to change dramatically, which is what the women's movement is all about. How effective has it been?
I think it's made women stand up and question a lot more what they expect of their own lives. And I think perhaps, rightly or wrongly, women's lib have tended to say that if men were different, then our lives would be different. I sense that we women have got to change our own lives as well as men changing their approach to us. I think we've got to start doing things for ourselves, because if we are choosing our goal, and if we're feeling that raising a family is something that we would find fulfilling, then that's great, as long as we have chosen to do it. It's this self-realization, it's this self-assertiveness. It's me saying, I think me staying at home raising the family is a good thing for me to do, and I am choosing to do it, rather than a feeling that society says I've got to do it and that there's no other role for me. And it would be nice if women could have that sort of freedom to say, well, look, I choose to go out to work and to pay somebody else to look after the kids, without these ghastly guilt feelings coming in, and that feeling that somehow you're failing and you're not doing what they think you should do. It's becoming more self-assertive and self-confident, and building up our self-esteem that what we choose to do is acceptable.